Hopefully you'll enjoy this. Because it's late in the day, I'd like to keep this light and entertaining. And really, I've just learned the word social entrepreneur. I suppose I'm a social entrepreneur. I didn't stop long enough in my quest to do this long enough to understand the word social entrepreneur, but I think it's very interesting that I'm following this panel because there's elements of this panel and in the story that brings me here today. I had the great opportunity to work in India for 1 year in the mid-'80s, and that had a profound effect on me. The concept of sustainable development sort of hit me when I was in India, and just at that same time when I was in India, the Brundtland Commission was meeting and creating a document called Our Common Future and coining the term sustainable development. But sustainable development didn't hit me in India as in the way that you might be thinking. What I was doing when I was going around India is I was talking to audiences about environmental issues, and afterwards lots of people would come up to me, and what I would see in their faces was envy for our lifestyle and the desire to emulate the kinds of cities, the kinds of lifestyle that we have here in North America. That frightened me deeply, because here is 1 billion people in India, another billion in China, and they're very, very quickly getting to the point where they can follow in our footsteps or take a different direction. I came home with a profound sense of responsibility to see what I could do to create an example that we would be proud and well off for them to emulate. And that's where I devoted my life to this work. And so there's a connection with India, but then the connection with Shell was quite interesting, both Shell International and Shell Foundation. I then began working on what my field was simulation modeling, and I began sort of applying my thinking around simulation modeling to how can we create better decisions within our cities, within our policy making. And so I began working at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada, in the Waterloo Simulation Research Facility with Dr. John Robinson. And we were, back in those days, this was the late 80s, our computer needed its own room and an air conditioner just for it, because it was this massive thing. And we worked for years on creating alternative futures. And this model was a beast, and it would take years and years to run. And we were building off the scenario planning work that Shell International founded in the 70s when the first oil crisis hit. They used scenarios to look at alternative futures, and we decided to use the same approach to see if we could look at alternative futures that would get us to a place where we would achieve a desirable future scenario. Now, after working at that for quite a while, we started to see that SimCity was becoming one of the most popular computer games, and it still is today the most popular computer game ever to be created. Here was this game that didn't involve any shooting or any violence. It was about urban planning, and people had this huge desire to play it. So there was obviously something that they did that captured the imagination of people. And right then, one of our researchers said, if they can create SimCity, why do we have to be in an air-conditioned computer room typing away at this massive thing? Can't we create something that we could actually engage the community in looking at alternative future scenarios? And so that one sentence cost me about 10 years of work. We started the Sustainable Development Research Institute at the University of British Columbia, and what I'm showing today is the result of that work and our work since. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. The idea is about linking in the minds of as many people as possible in our communities, the relationship between choices that we're making and consequences that we care about. And it's that simple. We have discovered that it's not planners or technical people that need this understanding. We don't have the political or the public support for making the kind of changes that we need to make. We're making decisions today that are inconsistent with our own priorities. We're creating future scenarios that none of us want to live in. And we're doing it here in North America, we're doing it around the world. So our quest, if you'll pardon the pun, is to see if we can make connections between the choices that we're making and our own values. We do that by developing a system where we can simulate future scenarios for a city and ask people a series of questions, and then look at those questions and various options that we have under those questions, and then see the consequences of our choices, not for the next few years, but for the next 30 or 40 years. We can visualize the future in a variety of ways. We can identify key trade-offs between things that we hold as important values and priorities, and then we can compare scenarios next to each other to see how they perform. It's that easy. The interface is designed to be very, very easy to understand. It's not a technical tool, it is a communication tool. We have scenario questions beside scenario results. We're trying to connect choices with consequences. So since we developed this approach at the University of British Columbia in the 90s, we've now taken it around the world. We've worked with, because we were naive and didn't know our limitations, the first project we took on after we developed one for Greater Vancouver was Mexico City. We thought, why not? The population of Canada in one valley, that would be an interesting case study. So that was our first case study, and then we went on to Bangalore, India, and the Pearl River Delta in China, and Indonesia. And we've just recently come back, and we're starting to do more work in Canadian and North American cities, because that's where we see a lot of change happening, a lot of growth happening, and frankly, a lot of problems that we need to mitigate. The tool is designed to engage people in a conversation, and so we run a lot of engagement workshops, town hall meeting type things, where we start by identifying, getting the audience to tell us what their own priorities are. We're not telling them technically what sustainability is, we're asking them what do they care about in terms of their future and their children's future. They give us information on their social and their economic and their environmental priorities, and then we set them to work on making choices and reviewing scenarios, and we go back and forth until we create a desirable future that meets the community's own values. So we'll use a variety of techniques to have them making choices. We've tried to create these things as fun as possible, so we'll use these electronic handsets, and we thought that they were great. It gave us an opportunity not only, so if you have this many people in the room, and everybody has a handset, the first thing that we ask them is sort of identify who's in the room socioeconomically. And so we've got sort of a read on how representative is this group in terms of the population of our community. Who's missing from this conversation? It gives us important information on that. But it also gives researchers important information because every handset is keyed to that individual. We know how people are voting on different priorities throughout the entire day. And so we can actually track what kind of information causes people to change their mind on values of different demographics or different backgrounds. That's important information in terms of developing a social marketing program to create the change. We can actually pinpoint the key tipping points for different folks in our community. Once we've then created a desirable future and actually have consensus in the room that this is a future that we'd like to see for ourselves and our children, then and only then do we have the license to go on to the question, let's talk about creating a plan to create that future. Typically, planning processes in North America and abroad fail because they start by asking the question, what should we do? They don't have any vision in the room that is commonly held. And so how can you possibly create a plan if everybody's mentally going in a different direction? So the question is, can we get people to agree on a common vision and then start the conversation? And what does that get us in terms of buy-in and support along the way? The Shell Foundation, and here's where the Shell Foundation comes in, took a hold of our approach that we were developing and got very excited about it because of the synergy and the background in terms of scenario planning, but also in terms of the community engagement aspect of it. And so one of the things that we did together was we created a concept called an interactive decision theater. We developed these theaters where every seat has buttons on the arms of the chair, and In this case, this is a facility in Vancouver called Science World. They get about 500,000 people a year through Science World. We have a 230-seat theater where children, primarily children and their families, come in for schools and on weekends, and they can answer a series of questions about what they would like in terms of how many cars would you like? What would you like to eat? Where would you like to live? And so forth. And the collective answers of all of these people then creates a future scenario. And they're swept 40 years into the future, and they're shown the consequences of those decisions. It's a 22-minute experience, and it's a lot of fun, and it's a way of getting people engaged and thinking about the consequences of our choices long term. The other thing that we've done, because the demand for engagement on these things sort of outstrips the supply to do workshops, is we've developed an internet-based version of this. And we didn't really know how popular this would be, and we didn't know, frankly, how much our servers could handle in terms of traffic. And so when we first released the internet version, we decided to just let the word go out by word of mouth. Just trickle it out there, and to our surprise and shock to our servers, within 7 days we had 33,000 people who had found it, logged on, started creating their futures, and this system allowed you to explore different future scenarios for your community and then send your preferences to your political representative saying, this is what I'd do. And it was amazing to see not only the popularity of that, but the convergence on a vision. People actually agree far more than they think when they're actually given a tool to explore the future consequences of their choices, because we care about similar things. And trust me, there are win-win scenarios out there if we look for them. So let me just give you a quick run through of MetroQuest. I'm going to try to not get too passionate about this. It's difficult because I am a little bit passionate about it. But I mean, the content of this talk is really about techniques for engaging the community and the value of doing that. So if I digress, just sort of clear your throat or something, or raise your hand. So here's a recent set of workshops that we've been running. This happens to be Greater Vancouver. I chose this community because I think probably a few people know about Greater Vancouver. This happens to be a community that's very passionate about their future. And the first thing that we do in a workshop is we say, if we're going to manage growth, what kind of growth do we need to manage? And people are very surprised that in North America, most North American metropolitan areas are going to experience a doubling or tripling in the population over the age of 60. And so we think we're building houses for today's market. But what we're really doing is building housing for a market that lasts at least 50, 60, 70 years. The transportation decisions and housing decisions we make have a lifespan far beyond the today's market. So people should have cleared my throat because I was getting carried away there. Anyway, so we start off by saying, what kind of population are we going to have to manage? Now, this is a community. Here is Greater Vancouver in the year 2001. Now, here's a community that's passionate about maintaining the quality of our environment. People move to Vancouver because it is just beautiful. There's lots of natural land. There's lots of precious agricultural land. It's a river delta. And so people are passionate about not only about the natural environment, but also the air quality is a real problem because of the wind blowing off the water, and the wind gets trapped by the mountains, and we have a significant air quality problem, much more significant than a population of an equal size that's out on an open playing field. So if we were to follow the current trend scenario, this might be 2011, 2021, 2031, and 2041. So if you were from Vancouver, you would gasp, and most audiences do. If we then look at this sprawling population scenario and we look at some of the other implications of it, for example, transportation, activity, something that was mentioned by Kurt, we love our single occupant vehicle trips. For some reason, we just love to travel around all alone in our cars, and you can see that characteristic actually gets worse over time. Not only are people traveling all alone in their cars in 2041, but they're traveling much farther than they did in 2001 because people are living further and further away from their destinations, and they have less and less opportunity for any kind of alternative. So we go through, and we could sort of look through several characteristics of the current trend scenario, but take it from me, there's a lot of negative aspects to it. We get people then motivated to look at an alternative. So here we then start opening up a series of options that we have about the future of our city. Here is 2041 if we were to follow a policy of favoring suburban development as we have been in the past. If we were to instead look at a compact growth scenario, as our smart growth advocate friends are suggesting that we do, we can create a different future scenario just by clicking here, and we get a completely different view of the future. Now, interestingly, at workshops, people say, well, that's an awful lot of density. I mean, that's too much. That's a big difference between this, and we don't want to create a Hong Kong here. And so obviously people need some more information, and anything that you can do that is visual is incredibly powerful, not only in terms of helping people understand things, but helping people remember the content much later. So we can click anywhere on the map and bring up a visual of what these kinds of neighborhoods look like, so people can kind of get an awareness of what are we talking about in terms of this development. And this then allows us to sort of paint a picture of what we would like to see in the future, explore different policies, mix and match with transportation investment, resource management, and other things to look for those win-win scenarios that see us improve environmentally, economically, as well as on social priorities. Now, to fast forward again, I'm just going to look at a couple of scenarios that emerge from a process that we've run in this metropolitan area over the past several years, where we've engaged, we lost count at 50 or 60,000 people in the process, the formal engagement process, and then who knows how many on the internet. What emerged is a very strong vision. The community was telling us that they agree on a vision for where we would like to be in the future, and this was an example of how public the campaign became, where we're looking at a two-page spread in the Vancouver Sun talking about these future scenarios. So here they are. The future on top is the future that the community chose. The future on bottom is the future that would take place if we continued with the current trend. What people liked about the future on top is the preservation of open space, is the development in and around where we have existing transit, so people with walkability to transit systems. And people thought, not only is that good just for air quality and environmental reasons, but if we have 3 or 4 times the number of people over the age of 60, people might appreciate a little bit more walkability in our communities. People might appreciate not having to mow the lawn. Certainly young families appreciate having yards and so forth, but when the demographics shift so much, what is going to be the demand for suburban neighborhoods in the future? Something very important to consider. Here's one technique that we use, and the point that I want to make here is engage people on their own values and priorities. We get people to tell us what their values and priorities are, and we map them around this circle diagram. On this diagram, here are the things that the community told us were most important to them. These are all goals of the community. On this diagram, bigger is better, and you can see the green scenario is actually outperforming the current trend on every single indicator that the community identified was the highest priority for them. We can then go into it and sort of dive into what's happening in these things. Physical health is much better. We can see in the current trend scenario, our spending in our metropolitan area, it way outstrips our capacity to raise taxes for the area. We have about a $600 million deficit by the year 2041 in Greater Vancouver, something that nobody's very happy about because it would mean raising taxes significantly or lowering services in other areas. This happens because the more we spread out, the more roads we have to maintain, the more pipes we have to maintain. It's more costly per person. It's just simple math, but when you play it out over time, you can be actually very quickly tricked by developers into developing suburban neighborhoods, but they don't pay for themselves over time because developers don't pay the taxes when the roads need repair. It's the community that does. And so we really need to look at the life cycle of our economic flows in our cities. Contrast to that, because we're developing more efficiently in the smart growth scenario, we're actually bringing in more money than we're spending, and so that gives us an opportunity to raise services in other areas. And with a tripling or quadrupling of the number of people over 60, and me being one of them, I'm certainly happy to see that, because I think I'm going to need some services in 2041. Access to transit was a real theme. You see, we were successful in allocating land use such that over 25% of the population lived within 500 yards of a transit stop, compared to a decreasing to about 6%. The differences there in terms of transportation performance were incredible. It caused people to get out of their cars voluntarily because they just simply lived closer to or worked closer to a transit area, and it became more efficient and more convenient for them to take transit. That's what it takes. Vehicle distance travel, despite a doubling of the population in the metropolitan area, we have the same amount of vehicles on the road. This is because we have more people in higher occupancy vehicles. Buses have 25 people in them, cars have 1. It's an awful big difference in terms of vehicles on the road. So when you talk about reducing congestion, you have to think about land use in your cities in order to accomplish it. Commute time, we talk about minutes per day being saved, an enormous amount of minutes per day being saved as a result of these scenarios. Climate change presentations yesterday, so greenhouse gas emissions, big differences there where we can actually meet the Kyoto Protocol. Pollution emissions, big problem in Greater Vancouver and many other of our metropolitan centers. So that's the quick run through of what we discovered when we engaged the community. They actually did agree on a vision. They saw win-win situations and a convergence with what our needs were and what our values and priorities were and what kind of policies to make. It's hard work. It takes a lot of engagement, but the rewards are that you can actually, I'm going to skip through this. This is just a description of all of the results that you can look at. Depending on who you have in the audience, you want to be able to focus in on their priorities. So we can look at an awful lot of different results and focus in on different aspects of the scenario. And of course, the scenario summary brings in information from the multiple bottom line point of view. Just want to finish now on the lessons that we learned. We thought at the beginning of this process that we were developing an analytical tool to teach people, to teach scientists about how cities worked. We discovered that that was not the problem. The world is littered with the carcasses of brilliant metropolitan plans. Planners know this stuff. They study it all the time. They go to school for it. They create plans that are actually well thought out and quite smart. What they lack is the public and the political support to actually make a change in their community. And that is tough work. You need to engage enough people in the community so they will never elect anybody who will not follow the vision, and they will hold decision makers to it when they go forward. And we do that in a variety of ways. Very, very deep stakeholder engagement. So at the end of the process, the community feels they own the plan. They helped create it, and they go forward with it, and they don't let anybody veer off from it. Fostering dialogue on people's own values and priorities using their language, not what the technical people tell us we need to be striving for, but what people care about and what they tell you they care about. Before you ask them what they would do, make sure that they understand the costs and benefits of different options, and then gather their feedback on what they would like to see happen. And finally, once a plan has been put in place, do everything you can to bolster that plan during implementation. One of the things that we're doing where we managed to engage 60% of a particular community in the planning process, where we created a 15-minute slideshow. When council for the municipality is meeting, that 15-minute slideshow reminds them when they're sitting down that they're making plans within the context of a 20-year vision that the community helped create. And so when they're deciding what to do about the detailed decisions of the day, they're actually being held responsible for that vision. If we don't connect decisions that we're making with a long-range strategy, we will continue to diverge on those axes. I want to thank you very much for that and your attention. I really have enjoyed meeting you and being at this conference. I applaud the work that you're doing. Here is a few ways that you can learn a little bit more. I do have a limited number of descriptions of MetroQuest and some more information here. And tomorrow, I think I will be at one of the tables for lunch where you can come and chat and share some ideas and inspirations. Thank you very much.